Hi everyone, welcome. I'm already gloved up because I'm ready to feed a couple of my worm bins. And the worm bins are even up here on the bench already, all set to go. Usually I'll bring one bin up, feed it, return it, bring the next one up, feed it. Today I thought we might change things up a little bit, and I thought we might keep them both right here on the bench and maybe even feed them together at the same time. So I was starting to feel like we were allowing the feedings for these bins to become a little bit mundane, because the last time they were fed, 10 days ago, I came down with a fairly routine feeding, which was coffee, and then I came down with a couple banana peels, and what made it kind of mundane and routine was that even the prior feeding had been the exact same feeding of coffee and banana peels. So no banana peels today. I promised that I would change things up, so I've got a whole variety of different strawberry and pear and apple, a variety of fruits in here, as well as a pile of cherry tomatoes. So I thought by going that route we would be able to give them a little bit of variety. And now that they're 214 days of age, they're getting their 19th feeding. So these worm bins are getting up there in age. Although for me to exceed 200 days in my worm bins, it's really not that big a deal, because I've been actually striving, in some of my bins at least already, to get the bins to go even over 300 days of age. So let's get the camera aimed down onto the worm bins so you can see what's happening here. The coffee filters that you see here are just indicating where we last fed. So the same way I removed the plastic coverings, I guess we can get rid of these also. And it looks to me like they're holding up pretty good. It seems like there's either a tear here or a nibbled through spot, but other than that, they are definitely holding up pretty good. Usually you can tell that there's a lot of wear when the edges start getting really heavily worked with the worms nibbling them down. So here we go. 2 sister bins all set to go. Both launched on the same day, both 214 days of age. And I believe as far as the worm count goes, the check-ins have all been done at the same time. So there's really not a lot of variety here. They're pretty much identical for the most part. Before we disturb things, I've been treating most of my systems. Even though I don't see any flying insects in here, the reason I'm spraying this stuff in here is I am trying to treat all my systems regularly during every check-in with some of this Mosquito Dunks solution. And I figured before we disturb things, if there are possibly any flying insects that are camping out in here, then this stuff is going to be laid down on the very top surface, because the top surface is where I would assume to find either the flying insects or their eggs or their larvae. This stuff actually targets the development of their larvae, not permitting them to grow to that next phase of maturity where they can actually breed. So it's so weird to be in this different orientation, because I almost always have the bins oriented 90 degrees the other way, where the feeding's in front of me. But the feedings are going to go right across here where you saw the feeding zone indicator. And even though we're probably not going to see, after 10 days, we're probably not going to see any leftovers of the coffee that they received, but the banana peels they got could quite possibly still be showing up as leftovers in here. And I guess since the previous feeding was also banana peel, we might find an extra stem or whatever. So we'll probably run into some banana stems here and there. As far as how much of the peel we're gonna see, well, sometimes it sort of depends, you know. We are in the winter months, and the temperatures down here in my wormery are kind of cool, which in itself could be enough to slow down worm composting activity a little bit. But you know, even though it is a little bit cool, it's cooler than it is upstairs in the house, because the heat doesn't run down here in the basement. But it's not cold like outside, like the winter temperatures we're here and there experiencing. Although it's been a very mild winter, with a couple cold streaks here and there, but for the most part, we have a little bit of cold kind of come through, and then it sort of warms back up again, leaving us with a very mild winter so far. This is half of a corn cob, and there was a couple chunks of banana peel, and even one stem of a banana right there. And since we fed banana peels 2 feedings in a row, I was sort of expecting that we might bump into a second stem of a banana peel. But we're not going to go crazy looking for it. If we bump into it, and here it is, then we do. If we don't, we don't. Then we don't. So I do typically try to round up the feeding, the feeding from the previous check-in to see how it's coming along, to get a sense of whether what we're giving them is sort of sized correctly and kind of on par with what's needed in the bin. Or am I going overboard, or am I being a little bit stingy? And then I sort of just get this sort of sense of the cadence that I'm following to come back into my worm bins. Here again, like I said earlier, it was 10 days since the last check-in. And based on what they got last time, it seemed like a realistic time to come back to give them more food. Although you got to admit, what they're getting today, even though each bin's only going to get half of what's here, it's a lot more than just a single banana peel, that's for sure. And you can see how they also received a good bit of bedding last time. All this shredded paper that you see scattered about was laid down before we entered the food, or dropped in the food. And there's a good bit of it remaining. And I'm certainly not going to try to, round that stuff up. But I do like to sort of blend it in with the surrounding materials if I can. Because I don't want to see that stuff just sitting there in a big pile or a big clump going nowhere fast. It does seem to me like the stuff has a much greater chance of getting worked down by the worms if it's just, scattered throughout the material. So yeah, and a banana peel and some coffee really aren't the types of feedings that are going to bring a lot of moisture with them. But I'm looking at what they're getting here today. All these little tomatoes, they're going to kick off some good moisture, and all these frozen bits of pear, I believe it is, a little bit of strawberry in there as well. I'm hoping that those things are going to bring with them a little bit of extra moisture, because it does feel like these bins, or at least this one, could probably benefit from a little jolt of extra moisture. Let's see how this one's coming along. I mean, you saw the plastic covering, the bubble wrap covering that the system was covered up with. I mean, the reason for that is to help preserve what moisture exists within the system, not let it just be lost to, natural drying and evaporation. And it works really well, even though it doesn't go right to the edges. Maybe around the edges you do see a little bit of dry stuff. But you don't have to go very deep to get down to some nice damp material. So luckily we've been able to preserve a great deal of the moisture that these systems have just by covering up with plastic, and then preserving what moisture gets added with the feedings. But, if certain systems start to dry out a lot, then we could always supplement with some water. I always just prefer in a way to retain what moisture is there rather than simply allowing it to evaporate and then need to compensate and go back and forth. I'd rather just maintain a good, steady, comfortable level of moisture in the bins for the worms, rather than allowing it to sort of swing from dry to wet and back again. So here too, I did encounter like a slightly larger piece of bedding material there. It looks like part of a paper towel. And then more of this sort of just shredded paper and cardboard mix. And I'm just curious to see if we're going to find leftover banana peel. I'm sure we will. Because, I mean, like I said earlier, these bins are the same age. They've been managed pretty much identically from day one. And, they've been getting the similar feedings and all that stuff. So, here we go. Here's probably the banana peel they got last time, because it's pretty much intact still. I mean, a lot of the softer stuff that made it up was already nibbled off. Well, has it? Maybe not. I'm even wondering if that really dark stuff adhering to it might be even some of the coffee they got last time. I suppose it's possible. Another piece of banana peel. All right. Sometimes I do feel like I go a little bit overboard inspecting the feeding zone and trying to pick out all the old food items. It's totally unnecessary. I mean, if you were running your own worm bin, it would be perfectly suitable to just, take the top off, whatever you might be covering with. Perhaps dig a little trench and then drop the foods in there, complement the feeding with a little bit of bedding, and then go about your merry way. Oops. Me, I don't know. I'm just a curious type, I suppose. All right. Well, I think we've managed to excavate pretty nicely here. I mean, I was going to see if maybe we would want to follow suit with what I've been doing in a lot of my systems, which is to go pretty big on the bedding and always try to see what we could do about maximizing our use of the space in these tubs, and kind of run it more in the almost full mode rather than, I guess in the past I'd always sort of worked my way up to filling the bins up, and I started to wonder if maybe I'd be better off running the bins at almost full from the very beginning. And, you know, as the worms deplete the material in the system, there's the stem of a banana, then we can, you know, backfill and compensate for that. Oh, another stem. So I think we've just found the stems of the past 2 bananas that they were fed, as well as some of the peels. You know, these systems having started over 200 days ago, 214 days ago, they weren't really subject to that thinking right from the start. So over time, I've gradually managed to work up their, you know, the capacity of the systems pretty good. And a lot of times for me, capacity is, you know, considered at capacity as long as I've left myself extra space so that I can do what I like to do, which is excavate and pile up materials. So I would be reluctant to add a whole lot more material to this, you know. So we might drop in a little bit of bedding, but we're not going to go overboard. And then we'll give them their feeding. So why don't I get my prepared bedding mix? It's more of the same of this stuff here. Shredded paper, cardboard, and leaves. Oh, check that out. There must be some sort of a mold or something growing here within this container, because the entire top surface here, I mean, here where I've picked some out recently, you don't see it growing, but this section that's been undisturbed, you can see sort of like a fuzz developing over the top of it. And I believe that that's just a certain type of mold that just looks like that, but it's so interesting. It almost looks like there was like a little snowstorm in here. So yeah, I think a handful in each bedding, in each bin is probably sufficient as far as bedding goes. Because you could see how much is still left over from previous check-ins. There's plenty of stuff still in here. So while I didn't want to give them no bedding at all, I also didn't want to go in the opposite direction and go overboard. So I think this will be sufficient to complement today's feeding. Let's start getting their food in here. So we'll try to divvy it up fairly. This looks to me like what might be about half of a pear. I tried to chop what was here up to a certain degree so that I wouldn't have to fumble with it too much down here once we arrive down in the wormery. So I think that those 2 chunks of pear are a pretty good split, and then there's a little extra here, a little extra there, and then perhaps a handful of cherry tomatoes, another handful of cherry tomatoes over here, perhaps picking up a strawberry or 2 along the way, and then that only leaves us with a couple little bits of strawberry. So I think we've done a pretty good job divvying up the food portion evenly so that each bin gets a fair shake at it. Oh, this is kind of opportune too. I can wipe some of this juice of the pear off my glove. When I went to put this sweater on, I peeked inside of it before slipping it on, and I noticed a whole bunch of this orange napkin. Must have been left in one of the pockets of my jeans, and it got completely shredded. And I guess the static attraction, it just ended up all over you can even see a little bit of it here, a little bit of it there. There's still traces of it all over the place on this fleece sweater. I did manage to get the majority of it out, I believe, but some of it still remains. So before we plop in the coffee, let's return all these leftovers too, so that the old foods are in there next to the new foods. And I tell you, the old foods, there's not a whole lot in here. There's a corn cob holding up pretty good. It seems like we found corn cob bits over in this one, but not in here. So, I mean, we're pretty much even Steven on these two systems, but perhaps not 100%. And I'm not going to go crazy trying to make that happen either, but just little differences, you know, with the assumption that both systems are almost identical. Little differences do sort of stand out. And sometimes that can actually be beneficial to help you track down something that might be going really poorly or something that might be going not so good. And then you could track it down and either mimic it if you like what you're seeing, or perhaps eliminate it if it's not causing good results. So you see this big pile of coffee. What I've been trying to do is I bring in my worm chow. This is just pulverized bird seed, pulverized pumpkin seed, pulverized nuts even, some neem seed meal, some oatmeal. There were some other things in here too, which I don't recall. So whatever's around gets mixed into my worm chow. So I guess the whole idea of me wanting to mix the coffee with the worm chow is that I'm assuming that it's going to make it a little bit more interesting for the worms, so that it doesn't just get left over there as a big pile of stuff that the worms are not interested in eating. I figure if the worm chow and the coffee are all blended together, then the worms are going to probably enjoy it more, but I really don't know if it's working or not. I think what we saw earlier might have been leftover bits of coffee when we excavated what was stuck to the banana peel, but I didn't see anything that resembled worm chow on it. Perhaps we didn't do the mixing in of the worm chow last time. I did actually replenish my supply. Here's some corn cob. I guess we were proven wrong that there is in fact corn cob in here as well. So I did replenish my supply of worm chow the other day, so now I feel really generous with this stuff. Perhaps last time we were in here 10 days ago, maybe we were just feeling a little bit stingy with it, or maybe we just forgot to add it. Maybe because I was running low at that point. And now I feel like I could be generous with it again. Alright, fun stuff. What is this? Just a big lump of stuff that should be bedding, but it's all just sticking there together dry. So yeah, I mean, when you're covering up with a piece of plastic like what I'm using, these bubble wrap chunks, and that don't go all the way to the edge, you might see a little bit of dryness on the outer edges, but that's fine. It's not a big deal. Sometimes I use plastic bags that really do allow for me to cover almost the entire surface, edge to edge, and there I got moisture everywhere, so the entire top surface is fair game for worm traffic. Sometimes when I'm using a slightly smaller covering, like we're doing here with these bubble wrap toppings or tops, yeah, you might be leaving a little bit of the edge to remain dry since it's exposed to the air, but it certainly isn't much. Oh, I just saw a little flying insect, so that might in itself be validation that applying the BTI Mosquito Dunks solution was a good idea. And I'll just continue on with it until I see virtually no flying insects anywhere. Because here and there I still start, you know, seeing one every now and then, but I got to admit, since I started applying this stuff a few weeks ago, it does seem like it's done a pretty good job controlling their numbers, but it doesn't seem like the job is 100% done yet. But we're getting close. So, well, I've got a few things I've got to take care of getting cleaned up. My glove. And put away the bins, but I'm not going to waste your time with that because that's boring. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.